Welcome to Weekly Talkback. I'm Kevin Beers,
And I'm David Witten.
and this is the show where we get to talk back to Pastor Dave about his message from the previous day, which was November 5th, 2023, about the message that he delivered. And this message was entitled, If God is God. So, jumping right in here.
All right.
So in your message, this is something that you said.
The thinking goes all our needs can be met by going to these different gods. That I can take what I want from this God and take what I want from this God and blend it together to make my own faith. So what are some of the false gods we seek and cling to? Well, certainly our work, our careers, our professions, our hobbies, even our bodies. We live for the gods of vacation and weekends, the god of fine dining and expensive clothing. We worship the god of our material possessions, the god of our investments, the god of our retirement. Anytime we worship things and not God, they end up taking the place of God.
What I really wanted to get into was how I've noticed that in church, we talk about worship all the time, but never once that I recall have we ever defined what worship really is. Now,
Okay.
maybe we have, and and I'm just thinking I haven't heard it, but how do you define worship?
Well, I think technically the word originates from worth, WORTH. So something of value, something of worth that means a lot to you is basically where the word comes from. Now, I think we've turned it into something a little bit different. So worship is something that, in my opinion, you place over and above most everything else. So in other words, if I worship God, I'm placing God and his worth and value above everything else. If I worship material possessions, I obsess over them. No, I'm starting to lose track of stuff here. You help me.
Well, now one of the things that you just said there was, worship being that it's something we place over everything else. And I can agree with that, but then why do we call a church service a worship service? What
Well, because we're placing God above everything else. I mean, in a worship service, aren't we basically worshiping God? I mean, isn't that the whole idea?
well, but okay, so what that connotates to me is for this 1 hour a week, we place God above everything else. And to me, that's a little bit of a negative connotation because it's saying that the other
Yeah,
how many ever hours there are, we are not placing God above all else.
good point. Valid point.
So that's why I wanted to get into this definition of worship, because really what does it really come down to actually worship God? I mean, we have a worship service where yes, everything is centered around God. I get that. But what about all the other hours of the week?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
do we worship God when we're not focused, or are we just wrong to not focus on God when it comes to everything?
Well, that's a valid point, no, I mean, I think that what we need to do is learn to worship God in everything that we do, in everything that we say. That all of our being is an act of worship, whether it be serving the veterans shelter this evening as we're going to do, or whether we're in the Walmart line and chip in an extra buck for someone who's short of change and trying to buy a few things. All of that, essentially, in my opinion, should be identified as worship, because you're raising God as front and center in everything you do.
Okay. Okay. Um, what does that look like? For instance, in your daily life, how does that what does that look like? And what does it look like, maybe if you don't want to use yourself as an example, what does it look like in someone else's life? I mean, you
Good.
mentioned a couple of incidences there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I think before placing God first, I mean, I think it's more than just some sort of abstract thinking. I think the idea of worshiping God and placing God first in our lives means that everything we do, we need to evaluate as an act of worship. So when I go to work in the morning and I enter into my workspace, everything that I am about to do, whether I'm a pastor, but even for you, as a technical, not only technical director here at the church, but you're an independent business person that's working with technology. That everything that we do or say, we need to remind ourselves that we're doing it to glorify God.
okay. Yeah. No, I see where you're going with that. Again, like I said, I don't see where I've ever heard the term worship really defined. Even though we talk about it all the time, maybe we're supposed to gather the meaning from everything we say about it. But I think for people like me, who are very, very, very technical, having a definition is really a first step into
Mhm.
entering into that. Now, I've been a Christian a really, really long time, so I've come to a definition of worship, I guess. But I really think for newer people to understand what worship really is, that it's important to define it so they know what they're, because one of the references I make like on our Facebook posts is our worship service begins in 90 minutes, that's
Mhm.
Sunday morning.
Right.
Uh, what does that even mean to someone who doesn't know anything about church? What does that worship service, where if we define what worship is, it might be more understandable of what we're actually coming together to do.
Well, you said that you have a definition of worship is. I'd like to hear it.
It's basically placing God above all else, and everything that you do, actually, you defined it exactly the way I would define it. Everything you do should be glorifying God in some way. Like I can, some people will just naturally help others. It's more natural for them. They see somebody who's struggling and they will rush to help them out. They don't do it to glorify God. They just do it because that's part of who they are. Now, maybe
Mhm.
it is because they grew up with that moral background, but maybe they didn't. So, which one is worshiping God in
Right.
helping that person out? So, for me, who is not like this is going to sound horrible, but let's just go with it. If I see somebody struggling, I actually, in my mind, I'm like, I wonder if they'll be able to do it. Like, it doesn't occur to me that I could be the one who helps them. It's not a natural thing for me,
Mhm.
but over the years, in understanding what it means to be a Christian, what it means to glorify God, I now have more or less trained myself to say, "Oh, someone's struggling. That means I need to step in." For some people, these things don't come naturally,
Mhm.
and and like I said, it in a sense it sounds horrible because most people understand that's what we do. But for me, I my approach, I'm a very observant person, so I will observe what's going on, not always knowing that I should be initiating something.
Yeah.
And it's like if I'm in the grocery store and I see somebody struggling to get something off the top shelf, I'm the tallest guy in the aisle typically.
Yeah.
Will walk up and I will help them because I over time I've learned that people who cannot reach the top shelf need help, and I'm one who can help.
Yep. Yep. So thinking about this, see, there's a good side and a bad side to having this conversation be a spontaneous conversation. The good side is that we sometimes can come up with some pretty interesting things. The bad side is sometimes we don't come up with some pretty good things. But as I think about it now, as we're talking through this thing, I believe there is a statement that an early brethren by the name of Christopher Sauer said early on that describes worship to a T. And in fact, it was engraved over the keystone of our doorway to the entrance of our church where I grew up. And it was the statement, "For the glory of God and our neighbor's good." To me, that's the essence of worship. That everything you do, if you do it for those two things, that indeed is worship.
Okay.
Would you go along with that?
Yes, actually, I would. That Christopher Sauer guy must have been pretty smart. I actually wrote it. No, but that really, I mean, because it goes back to the two commandments when Jesus was asked what are the two greatest commandments: worship or not worship God, but
love God.
With all your heart, mind, soul, and body.
Yep.
And then also the other one, exactly like it, love your neighbor as yourself.
Correct.
So those two things, yeah, that encapsulates. I guess that does actually encapsulate worship too. Encapsulates pretty much everything. And
yeah.
Okay. I just want to back up to one thing in what I brought out, where you said I can take something from this God and take this other thing from this other God and then blend it together, make my own faith. It reminded me when I heard that, it reminded me when my kids were growing up, we did not have Santa Claus. That wasn't something we used, so we didn't have Santa Claus. But one year, my daughter Sarah wanted something so badly, and it was expensive, and she knew she wasn't going to get it because I made it really clear up front, you're not getting that. And she told us that she wants to believe in Santa Claus because there's a possibility that she can get what she wants if she does that. So when I first read it before the service, and then when you said it during the service, that's what it reminded me of. That idea that, well, if I want something, I can go over here and get it. Like I can ignore the God that I should be worshiping, go over to this other God, let's say, and get something else.
Right. Yeah. The other thing is, and I don't know how many minutes we are into our discussion, but the other thing is that I didn't really touch upon it all, but considered touching upon in the sermon is the actual gods that people worship. Not the false gods or the idols that we worship, like material possessions and so on, but actually the gods that we find within our society today, like those who worship the god of Hinduism, or the different gods in Hinduism, or Buddhism, or Islam, or the Native American traditions. We do live in a pluralistic society where there are a multitude of gods out there that we worship. I didn't go in that direction on this particular one, because I just felt like it was a larger conversation than what we could encapsulate in a 15 to 20 minute sermon.
Okay. Yeah. That and that one, that particular topic becomes a very politically charged one very quickly. So 20 minutes would not do it for that.
I have some thoughts on it, but I didn't feel like the context of that particular text, as well as just time restraints. I didn't go in that direction, but that's a conversation that probably ought to be had at some point in time. But again, like you say, it's a pretty divisive conversation.
Okay, we will wrap it up there. If you did not get to hear Pastor Dave's sermon or message, as we call it, If we have not heard that, we will link it down in the description. Go listen to that. Come back. Tell us what you think about this conversation that we're having. And how do you define worship? Tell us that. That'd be a very interesting conversation.
It would be.
And we will see you next week.
Take care. Blessings.